remember leaving your home? Where was the camp that you were taken to? Do you remember?
Actually, we'll put it on speaker real quick. Just 1 second.
Can we put this on speaker real quick?
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hey, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay,
This is her teacher. Thank you. We're going to go ahead. She's going to go ahead with the questions. Thanks.
okay.
Where was the camp that you were taken to?
You know, the camp that we ended up in was not ready. The camps were not ready in May of 1942. They were being built. But I think for certain economic reasons, we were rushed off the property. And my mother always lamented, why make us leave early when the camps weren't ready? They took us to temporary housing places. They used racetracks. They used county fairgrounds, anywhere where there were buildings. And many people were housed in horse stalls and animal barns. They just quickly put up partitions. It still smelled like the animals that had lived there. And they rushed us off of our farms. 85% lost their property. And some people believe that part of the removal, and we were forced to be removed, was to take away our property. In May, in an agricultural area like California, that's when all the crops are coming in. People in different parts, we raised strawberries, and they were just getting ready to be picked. People were just on the brink of getting out of the Depression. Houses and farms that had mortgages on them were just beginning to pay them back. And my dad said it was one of the best years that they had in terms of the crops that were being grown. And we left those crops just rotting in the fields. And people did not get to pay back their loans, and they lost lots of money, lost all of their money because they couldn't pick the crop. We were sent to Fresno, California, to the fairgrounds, and I remember it was hot. There were no trees, and it was so hot. And we were, I think, the temporary housing that we were in was on the parking lot. And the asphalt would melt so that when you stepped on it, your shoes would stick on the tar. And it was so hot in Fresno that the asphalt would bubble. And I know that as a 5-year-old, one of the things I liked to do was when the asphalt bubbled, I'd like to step on it and pop the bubbles. But what that did was it put tar all over my shoes. And when I would get up in the morning, because they used just barracks that had, they didn't even really put a roof on it. They just put tar paper on, I think, slats or something, and then poured tar on it. The tar would melt, and it would be in my hair. That was a temporary place. We were there from May until October. So that's a long time that we were in that temporary camp. And by October, the real camp that we were to be sent to was made available, and we went to Arkansas, the southeastern part of Arkansas, at a place called Jerome. There were 2 camps in Arkansas, Jerome and Rower. They became the 3rd and 4th largest cities in Arkansas overnight because each camp had over 8,000 people. Can you imagine moving 16,000 people across the country? And I believe it took us over a week because when trains that were carrying war equipment or troops came on the tracks, we would be put on a side track. The other condition the government made was when we went through any kind of town, even if it was a small rural town, the guards would come through and they would make us shut all of the windows, the coverings on the windows, because they were told that we were not to be seen by the people. That's why nobody knew that where we were going. We were hidden. They sometimes made us go through these cities at night, and we would be put on the side rails to wait until it got later, and so we would not be going through the towns when people were working or near the railroad stations.
How were you treated by the guards?
Well, some of them were very gruff. Others, obviously they had children and they would be kind, but we were afraid of them. They had guns. They would come through. They were very businesslike, and, they'd order us to pull the shades on the windows or whatever. We were not given much food, and, I know my cousin had measles, and so he was relegated to stay in the bathroom. He couldn't leave the bathroom because he was quarantined. And there were people that were got sick on the train because in those days the trains, would rock. And so there were a lot of people that were sick on the trains. And it took much longer than it would have normally because they kept putting us on the side. And once in a while, they would stop, especially if it was, out in the middle of nowhere, and they would give us 10 or 15 minutes to just walk. They would make us exercise. For some people, like my grandmother and my grandfather, who was 75, they were elderly. Even getting in and out of the trains was difficult, but probably necessary. There were people that were not able to walk that well. Everybody had to go. We were not allowed to take any pets. We had to leave all of our pets at home, and I had to leave my dog. And what's interesting is I don't even remember what that dog looked like. I must have totally erased it out of my mind. And it was a dog that followed me all over. My mother said it was my constant companion, but I have no memory of that dog.
Did you have any siblings?
no siblings, but I had a lot of cousins. Both my aunts, my brothers, my father's older sisters had 7 children, and we lived in the same town. My grandmother was the caregiver, so I was raised with my cousins as my siblings. We were, 2 of them were my age, and they ranged from 15 down to an infant that was 6 months old.
Do you remember being released from your camp?
We were released earlier than most people because Jerome, the camp that we were in, was a smaller camp, and the government by 1944 had prisoners, German prisoners of war, and they needed a camp to house the German prisoners. And one of the things I remember is when we first got, this is sort of a backstory, when we first got to Jerome, you know, you had people like my dad who had been a farmer, worked all his life, and we were prisoners. You were in a 16 by 20 room, just room enough for cots, and that's all they gave you, the room and the cot. No bathrooms in that building. You had to go outside to the middle of the compound to go to the bathroom. It was arranged in blocks like a military camp, and 250 people lived in each block. There was one building that was a bathroom on one side, a shower on the other, and laundry room in the middle. It had the plumbing and the hot water tank. There were 16 toilets in the women's side and 16 toilets in the men's side. There were no partitions. That meant 16 toilet bowls in the middle of the room. 8 in one row, 8 in the other row. They were back to back, all open. And the men's side did not have toilet seats. The showers were what they called gang showers. There were shower nozzles sticking out from the wall with benches towards the front of where the entrance was. You came in, laid your clothes on the bench, and took a shower at one of the 8 shower nozzles. There were no partitions, absolutely no privacy. It was very humiliating. All the laundry had to be done by hand. That included sheets, towels, and all your clothes. And in those days, if you had a baby, the baby used a diaper, a cloth diaper that had to be washed. Can you imagine 250 people sharing those facilities? I can guarantee that every time you wanted to go to the bathroom, you had to wait in line. We also had a shortage of toilet paper. Sometimes there wasn't any. You probably are not familiar with catalogs, but the catalogs had pages similar to telephone books, so it was, rather thin. When we ran out of toilet paper, somebody would put a catalog by the door, and you would have to rip out a page to take in there for your needs. So, we were herded like animals. We were prisoners of our own country, and we were fed 3 meals a day, but there wasn't enough protein because the government allotment was 35 cents per person per day, and even in 1942, that wasn't enough. The infant mortality rate was 10 times higher in the camps. Many women complained that, we didn't have milk, we had powdered milk, that they weren't getting enough nutrition, and so there were many stillborns, there were many miscarriages, and the death rate was highest for older people, elderly, and children. A lot of children died. Half of us were children, 18 and under. Then I don't know what the percentage of women was, but there were a lot of women. There were very few men of the age that could be drafted into the Army. My grandfather on my father's side was 75. My grandfather on my mother's side was in his 60s. So you had elderly, and you had women, and you had children, and we were told that we were put in there because we might be disloyal to our country and help Japan. And the FBI was ready by actually the day after Pearl Harbor to arrest the leaders that were identified in the community. About 5 years earlier, Roosevelt had ordered that the FBI identify the leaders and people in the Japanese community because they were sort of planning a war. They knew that there would be a war with Japan. I think I've sort of birdwalked. I'm not sure I answered the original question. What was your original question?
Do you remember being released?
So we were there about 2.5 years, and they were going to close the camp to make it a German prisoner of war camp. So the government said you could not go back to, we were not allowed to go back to our farm in California. And we were lucky because there was somebody that was a friend of my father's who was running the farm and paying the taxes and the mortgage. If you did not pay your taxes and mortgage, even though you had no job, you had no money, you were incarcerated in a prison camp, you'd lost your property. That's how 85% lost their property. It was all done legally. If you missed your mortgage payment, the bank foreclosed and sold it at auction, kind of like what they're doing with reclosed houses now. So people that were able to buy those houses and property at just less than a tenth of their value. We weren't allowed to come back. We had to get a sponsor to go somewhere else. And one of my aunts had gone to Kalamazoo, Michigan, and she was a domestic. She was a cook, and her husband, my uncle, was the gardener. And she put us in touch with the Methodist Church. If you had somebody that could guarantee you a job and a place to stay, you could leave the camp. And we did. So in early 1944, my father went first and got a job in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And that's where we stayed for 2 years. And I don't remember too much of that trip, but I do know that we were afraid. We were stared at as we went by train from Arkansas to Chicago. And when we got to Chicago, my dad wasn't able to leave us right away, so, we had to wait at the train station. And I know my mother was very worried because people would stare at us. They'd make comments, we didn't feel very safe. But we were able to settle because the members of the Methodist Church in Kalamazoo, Michigan, there was a family there that sponsored us and helped us get a place to rent. And my dad was given a job at a bakery. I believe the man who owned the bakery was a member of the church. So if you could get a sponsor, you could leave. They took the people like my grandparents and my aunts and uncles. They had so many children, they decided to stay. And they moved them to a different camp. Some went to the other camp, Roar, in Arkansas. But my grandparents and my aunts and uncles were sent to Gila, Arizona, which was a camp that was situated on an Indian reservation. Most of the land used for the camps were federal property, and it was, I think that the property in Arkansas, which was right next to the Mississippi River, it was swamp land. The Army Corps of Engineers drained the land. Okay, I heard a beep. Is that, hello?
No, you good.
Is it okay?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. To the swamp and turned it into a camp. And I understand that it was one of those CCC camps. You know, during the Depression, they created CCC properties. They were, it wasn't a camp, it was a property that the government was trying to reclaim because it was next to the Mississippi River, and if they could drain it and clear it of the trees, it would make good farmland. What they did was, Army Corps of Engineers drained it, they put roads, they put a sewage system, they brought electricity, and, created this small city. It was built like a military camp. And I remember my father saying to my mother, said, Mary, you know, the people outside are worse off than we are. And we didn't understand at that time that most of Arkansas didn't have electricity in the rural areas. You know, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pick up my cell phone. Can I just pause for a minute and answer?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Hello?
That'd be good. That's fine.
Okay, sorry. Hello? 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 Sorry, I'm trying to get a hold of somebody. Hi, did you just call me? Hello? Did you just... Yes, this is. Oh, hey, you know what? I'm going to have to hang up because I'm on a conference call, okay? So I'll call you back later. Thanks. All right, bye. Okay, sorry. You want to ask the next question? Did I finish answering? Oh, I was talking about the Army Corps of Engineers. And they drained the land. We had electricity, but people outside in rural Arkansas did not. And so there were many people on the outside that were looking and saying, well, you know, those Japs, how come they get electricity? And there was some very strong anti-Japanese feelings from certain in the community. Other people said that it took their family out of poverty because the dads were able to work as carpenters to build the camp. Some of them received jobs like postal workers and people that would truck food in. And so the camps generated jobs for the economy in the local area. The second thing that happened is it was cold in Arkansas. We were from California. It snowed in the winter. And they had to put stoves in each of the rooms, small wooden wood-burning stoves. And they said to the people like my dad, he said, well, you know, there are a lot of trees here, so you cut the trees down, chop the wood. And there's a film, a collection of home movies. It's called Something Strong Within. And you can buy it online from the Japanese National Museum in Los Angeles. I'll email you the information. I think it's about $19. And you can see what the camps look like. You can see there are 10 different camps. So part of the film would be about other camps. But when you get to the part where you see Arkansas, you see people chopping down trees. You see ladies sawing the wood into 2-foot lengths, and then the men chopping it, and sometimes women were chopping it. And they would leave a pile by each block, and you were allowed so many pieces of wood, you know, per day during the wintertime. But what that did was it helped declare the trees. And I remember my dad saying that they were also taught how to use dynamite, and they were asked to pull the roots out. So the people in the camps then cleared the land, or cleared part of the land, and afterwards, when the camps were closed, the government sold the bottom land, which is very rich farming land, to people in the area, and it's now farms with very good soil. The camps were closed. The German prisoners came, and my dad was very upset when he heard that the German prisoners were used by the farmers to work, and they were allowed to go outside the camp. Some of them even lived with the farmers' families. And my dad was upset because he said, how can they let German prisoners work outside when we volunteered to do the very same thing as American citizens? And they said, no, we don't want those jobs. So there was a strong feeling of prejudice towards the Japanese at that time. And I think people looked at our faces and said, oh, you know, you look like the same people that bombed Pearl Harbor, so you're the enemy. And we were treated as the enemy. Even though both my parents were born in the United States. My grandfather came in 1889 to Hawaii. My dad's father came in 1893. So, you know, a lot of us, the Japanese people were here before the turn of the century, and but still not accepted as Americans. My grandfather's dream was to become an American citizen, but he never achieved that dream because by the time a bill was passed in 1954, the McLaren Act, allowing Japanese immigrants to apply for citizenship, he was 87 years old, and he couldn't pass the test. He couldn't remember the answers, and so he cried and said, I can't do it. So he never got his citizenship, which was too bad because he had lived here since he was a 19-year-old boy.
If you could give advice to those who have been discriminated against, what would your advice be?
Give advice to who?
Another nationality that's been discriminated against or is having a similar thing happen to them.
You know, this was one of the concerns in 1978. A group of people from the Japanese American community decided to either sue the government or ask for redress. You can do that. You can ask for redress, but it requires an act of Congress. It took us 10 years to pass legislation to give an apology and some reparations. You know, in this country, you can't just give an apology because each group that gets put in, a situation like this, the government would just have to write a letter. And it makes it so much easier to do this to another group. However, if there is a monetary cost to this, then it's sort of a deterrent. And the original question was, what advice would you give? We didn't say anything. We were, as a community, halfway. I think we believed that we weren't worthy citizens. You know, if you're told from the time you arrive on this soil that, hey, you know what, you're not as worthy as somebody from Europe or even somebody from Germany or Italy to become a citizen. You people from Asia, you're just, you're not good enough to become American citizens. And you believe that because you're told that from the beginning. And you know that you believe and you know that you have no right to speak out. And besides, there was nobody to stand up for you anyway. California legislature voted to send us into the camps. They voted to confiscate our land if we couldn't pay the taxes, or there were so many laws that restricted the rights of people that came from certain parts of the country. It wasn't an equal opportunity. We didn't speak out because we didn't believe we had a voice. Now I think the situation has changed. The situation changed when the civil rights movement gave African Americans and women the right to speak out. And it was only after the civil rights movement in the 60s that the Japanese American community believed that it was important to speak out. My mother's friends, most Niseis, were not in favor of trying to ask for redress. They said, oh, it's too late. What do we need? We've rebuilt our community where, our children have gotten education, and most of them are doing very well, so we don't need we don't need to do anything. And my mother's response was, it's not for us. It's for the future generations. It's for the next group that may be targeted. If we do not ask for redress, it makes it that much easier for somebody who is not thinking, somebody who has racist ideas or a bigoted frame of mind to target another group. And so it was important that we achieved redress. And it did take 10 years. And the Japanese American community raised $2.3 million to lobby Congress. You can't pass a bill unless you lobby Congress. You have to go over there and walk the halls, and you have to. Nobody got paid for it, volunteers, but we had to travel, and it was expensive to do the lobbying. The reason why the Japanese American community fully supported it is they wanted to make sure their children and another group would not be targeted. And we had no voice. If you don't have a voice,
Sorry, that was the 10-minute bell.
Okay, so, all right, time's up.
We've got another 5 minutes.
Okay. Does that answer your question? We didn't believe we had a voice. We didn't believe that we had a right to speak out, or that mostly anybody would listen. If you don't speak out, if you don't take some kind of legal action, yes, you will become a target. I think the example of speaking out and speaking out for rights has been a wonderful example has been shown to us by the Arab nations. Young people in the Arab nations are the ones that started the Arab Spring. They were the impetus, and they continue to, I think, try to get their rights, although some of that might be in doubt. But they did speak out, and we didn't. We did not protest. When they put up the, they didn't even send letters. They just posted signs on the walls of post offices, banks, and buildings. It was up to, and telephone poles. You had to go to the telephone pole and read to see what you were supposed to do. And then we are an obedient culture. We did what we were told. We packed up. We prepared to have somebody take care of our farm. Some people couldn't do that. They couldn't find anybody to take care of their things. And so, when they came back, their homes were they were burned, or their equipment stolen. Everything was gone. Most people lost everything when they came back. There was no one to protect us.
Looking back,
We didn't have anybody. No lawyers were, offering to help us. We didn't have the money to pay for it, so we kept quiet and we showed up at this train station like you're supposed to. We were the obedient, silent group. Didn't give the government any trouble. We didn't try to escape. We didn't try to, what could you do anyway? Half of us were children, 25% elderly. We allowed ourselves to be victims because we didn't have any way to fight back.
Looking back today, how do you feel about what happened to you?
unfair, and it was a tragic part of American history. But if you take a look at American history is full of acts of injustice, treating people unfairly. You take a look at the American Indians, African American slaves that were brought over here, and what happened subsequently. Every ethnic group, if you go back to your own ethnic group, whether you're Norwegian, German, Italian, the very first people of your group that came had problems. They were looked down upon. They were treated as second-class citizens. But the white people, if you were Caucasian, you were then blended and accepted. Those of visible ethnic differences have not been. The Sikhs have been here for over 150 years, and because they wear a turban on their head, they are seen as un-American or foreigners. We still have that visual concept. Who's an American? What does an American look like? If you showed a photograph of people with different costumes and different ethnicity to your college classmates and said, okay, identify the American, they will invariably point to the Caucasian person, the white person. We still have that feeling that to be an American, you have to come from a European country. Even though you speak with an accent, you could still be identified as American if you're white. I think that's part of why we were targeted. Okay? They incarcerated some German immigrants and Italian immigrants, but not the Italian Americans and the German Americans. And we were at war. The country was at war with Germany and Italy, but they were not targeted as we were. There was a report that was a study made during the Carter administration, and the result of that congressional committee was the mass removal of the Japanese Americans was the result of race prejudice, failure of political leadership, and what was the third one? It wasn't greed, but there were three reasons, and I think the most important one was race prejudice and failure of political leadership, and war hysteria. People were so upset with what happened at Pearl Harbor. And I can't remember the author, but I'll give you the title of a book. It's called Day of Deceit. And it outlines how the Roosevelt administration sort of pushed Japan into war. Because Roosevelt needed a war to get us out of the Depression. He needed that war. And he couldn't convince the people to participate in World War II after the great losses that the Americans suffered after World War I. So. Any other questions?
Nope, I think we're good. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I appreciate you doing this.
I'm going to email you some links. There is a school district here in California. It's called the Elk Grove Unified School District. It's where my mother and I and my dad